How are you, Cap?
Great.
Hello, you're all very welcome. Thanks very much for all those joining online.
More.
Just letting people in. A mix of online and in person, so all very welcome.
Thank you, folks. Obviously some familiar faces in the room, which is fabulous to see, and then some new faces as well, which is always good. So for those of you who don't know Raise, what we do is we're a startup accelerator based here in Belfast, but we support tech startups right across the UK and Ireland. And so we love to run events like this, both to bring founders together to have an opportunity to network, to talk to each other, thank you. But equally to also kind of upskill everybody on the different like emerging technologies that are coming out there. ChatGPT, obviously a massive one. If you haven't heard of it, it's probably been living under a rock. ChatGPT was, I think, it took 5 days for it to reach 1 million users, which is just unbelievable. Like I think it took Netflix 2.5 years, and Instagram was another couple of years. Like it is just everywhere. So we thought it was very fitting to bring together both those who have used it and those who are interested in using it, just to share their experiences so that we can kind of inspire you guys and say, okay, how can I either build a startup based off of ChatGPT, or how can it increase efficiencies in my startup? So that's what we're here to do today. So we have a couple of speakers online. So we have Dave. I'm going to go to you first with Dave, Jase, and Mike. Dave and Mike are actually over in the States, and Jase is up in the Northwest. So Dave, do you want to introduce yourself and we shall kick off?
Sure. So hopefully everyone can hear me. So my name is Dave Graham. I've run across a few of y'all in various ventures or another. I've worked with Alistair Cameron at Synthetica. I've done some stuff with Ignite Northern Ireland and the wonderful, illustrious Ian and Chris McClellan. I do some work with Scale Ireland, in addition to my day job, which is working in the Office of Research for, or Office of CTO, I should say, for Dell Technologies. So I spend a lot of time within kind of research and academic space, looking at emerging technologies like large language models, ChatGPT, and brought one of the most awesome people I know to be with you today, and that's Mike Ma over there from Research Rabbit, who's down in former neck of the woods in San Diego. So Mike, I'll kick it over to you, I guess.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike. I am the founder and CEO here at Human Intelligence Technologies. We build vertical search products that don't require a search bar. So instead of leveraging machines, we leverage all sorts of other tactics like human-computer interaction and other good stuff. Our first app is called Research Rabbit. To date, we've served about 360,000 academic researchers around the world, NIH scientists, NASA scientists, and so on and so forth. And we are now moving into our next domain, which is the financial domain. I am very excited to be here. Dave has always been an incredible advocate and mentor to us. And he said that we should absolutely stop by and say hello and pay it forward. So happy to be here, share what I can, and contribute to the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you both very much. Glad to have you here. And Jase as well, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jason Bell. I am founder of Synthetica Data, which is a service that enables you to get data ready for AI by cleaning, fixing, anonymizing all types of data. I'm also essentially I'm an AI consultant as well. I've written 2 books on machine learning, and I help and advise companies that want to start using machine learning and AI. So that's me. Thank you.
And then we also have some of our startups with the founders and teams that are joining to share some of their experience. So Connor online somewhere, I can see him. And then we also have Joanne in the room, and Nick is from upstairs, who's a big fan of ChatGPT. So yeah, like as I said, like today is really all about sharing experiences and hopefully inspiring you in how you can integrate ChatGPT to make your lives easier as startup founders, when very obviously there are resource constraints and there's a big opportunity to do things a little bit better and a little bit easier. So ChatGPT, I think Their background is really, really interesting. First off, OpenAI is the company that set it up. It was funded by Elon Musk, interestingly, and the current CEO, Sam Altman, as well as Microsoft and AWS. So certainly was an overnight success, and certainly a lot has gone into it. But when it launched, I think it was back in November, it very quickly was just making waves right across the entire world, really, which is why we brought the guys on to kind of share both, I suppose, the principles of the Michael coming in, both, I suppose, like the principles of like how it works, how ChatGPT works, kind of where it gets that data from, where it gets that information from, and then real life examples about how it can integrate into startups. So Mike, I'm maybe going to start with you because I believe you have a really, well, very interesting background, and maybe you could share a wee bit about kind of your experience with OpenAI tools like ChatGPT.
Sure. So in terms of ChatGPT, so ChatGPT is one product out of many lines of large language models, or essentially machines that can read and write. ChatGPT is known as GPT 3.5 in its sort of technical term. Our team uses GPT throughout our stack today for various sort of tasks. Historically, you might have had to train a model to understand very specific tasks from scratch. For example, you might have built a model that can handle entity recognition, which is to say you have a machine read a document, and then the machine says, that looks like a person, or that looks like a place. You'd have to train specific machines to answer those specific types of questions and tasks. Today, because GPT has read everything in the universe on the internet, is able to actually do those things out of the box, which saves a lot of time. Someone else has trained the machine to do all these different tasks, and you can apply it in all of these different ways, which is great. And just to sort of like add a little spice and give you sort of a sense of the opportunity here in using these technologies, there's a very large data company in the financial domain. They're called S&P, and one of their products called CapIQ generates a ton of revenue for this company. They're like very, very big company. That product took about 20 years to build and put together all of this data. By contrast, our team is able to put together specific parts of that stack in a matter of weeks. So it's like a lot of unbundling of all of these different tasks. That's the kind of power that you're able to play with now that this stuff is available out of the box. But I think that's it, because I know we have a lot to talk about, but maybe that's a little spice to start.
No, that's perfect. And how, so with your company, how have you seen it kind of, have you built using ChatGPT, or has it kind of integrated into what you're already doing?
Yeah, so our team uses GPT in a number of ways. We use it for things like fact extraction, for summarization. We also use some of the other language models as well from some of the other providers, because different language models are good or weak at some things versus others. What I'd probably note is it's important to do, so because language models can read and write, essentially, or reason, if you will, or think, if you will, you need to decide. I think most builders need to decide if they want to use this technology for what's called generative purposes, or like creative purposes. So these things can write whatever they want, and they can tell fantastic stories and answer questions in certain ways, but that's all sort of generative, and you can use them for those types of use cases. On the other hand, you can use these machines for sort of reasoning use cases or reading use cases. So large amounts of information, they can read it, distill it, extract information. And those are two very different ways of using this technology for very different products. Or so I think I would just say to think clearly about how you want to use them.
I think that's kind of key. What we've been saying, both here at Raising with our startup portfolio, is yes, there is that kind of, as you said, generative, creative kind of content creation, marketing support that you can do. But what's important there is really having the right prompts. So you're giving it like sufficient information that it is, capturing your brand tone of voice or whatever that may be, and also not taking it as Bible. Because obviously it's a very powerful machine, and its outputs are generally like of a really high standard, but always keeping that lens of, okay, this does need sense checked. It always needs that kind of human element to run its eye over it and ensure that the output is, a good reflection and correct as well and accurate. Jase, tell us a bit about ChatGPT, what your thoughts are on it, and how you've seen it used.
Yeah, I'm using it in 3 different ways right now. Not ChatGPT specifically, that does come into it though. First of all, I was in denial for 3 months, realizing that my job is essentially dead in 5 years' time as a software developer, which Marty will absolutely love because it'll save him a fortune.
Don't drag me into your paranoia. Honestly. Here's time. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're using Copilot quite a lot for doing code generation now, which is a language model for code, which GitHub had put together, which is a paid-for service. I'm using, within Synthetica, I'm using GPT for generating a lot of marketing content, help brochures, those kinds of things. Marketing things that I wasn't able to do myself. Now, I can write blog posts, but they take far too much time now. Whereas I can, with a decent set of prompts, just say, write me a post on this subject from a technical standpoint or from a general audience standpoint. And like you already just said there, Eva Jane, the prompts that you give it are vital in terms of the quality of the output. So I'm using it from that point of view. And I did a post last night on LinkedIn. I essentially said that my marketing department costs me $40 a month, which is a mixture of ChatGPT, Canva Pro, and Midjourney to generate images and then be able to create brochures in less than 15 minutes. Something that would have taken me a day, I'm now doing in 15 minutes. So it's a big deal. As a developer, yeah, I was in denial for 3 months, but I'm starting to see the value, and I'm now starting to put in, I'm using GPT to generate code in Synthetica. So when a user uploads a data set, it can then start building out a AI model, a machine learning model, whether that's a clustering algorithm or a neural network, and be able to generate the code from that on the fly instead of having to custom build it. So yeah, there's quite a few things going on that I'm using it for.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's that text side of things, and then there's that like content generation. Would there be many like kind of tech focused people in the room just to kind of gauge? Yeah, good. Okay, yeah. It'll be interesting to hear kind of your experiences of how it's coming through. But first, Dave, would you maybe share a little bit on, I suppose, if you've seen it in practice, both through your startup mentorship with Enterprise Ireland, but also with Dell?
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the place. I think, a lot of the enterprise, so again, Dell being the large enterprise that it is, it's been intriguing to watch a lot of the kind of knock-on effects that these models have, right? We've been used to, you start with very, very simplistic kind of chatbot and response type systems, right? And you kind of egg that into robotic process automation and some of these things. And then there's this inevitable collision where you have, well, like Dell's a merchant as well as a manufacturer, right? So similar to what Mike was saying before, you have this large collection of data that all of a sudden you have another outlet for, another way to start to creatively combine data together. You start to look at this kind of lossy or lossless nature of data, or stateless nature of data, however you want to choose to determine it. And it leads to interesting things. It starts to lead to interesting relationships, right? And this is all an abstraction behind the scenes, no less the generative side, which is, a GPT style system or whatnot. So what we're finding is that there's, these two different applications. There's certainly the creative application, which Jase has talked to. I'm ex-Dell marketing as well. And unlike Jase, maybe, I write blog posts every single morning. It takes me 15 minutes. So I don't have a need for ChatGPT to do that particularly for me. But I have a need for ChatGPT to look at specific things or look at these models for combining interesting sets of data. And I think that's where Dell's exploration of this becomes, it's not unique to us, but it becomes interesting. Is how do we start to look at these kind of typically insular data sets, whether it be financial, manufacturing, whatever, and we start to combine them across and synthesize across, right? I don't know if George Armstrong's in there, but schematics, it's this nature of your stock taking. How do you start to look at everything that feeds into how stock is permutated, or not permutated, but whatever, I'll use that word, how that stock is going through a system or going through a company or a storefront or whatever. So we're doing something similar there. I think on the other side of this is kind of part of my research and part of my study and doing my doctorate degree down at UCD in Dublin, right? Is how these actually impact society, right? So there's the $40 a month marketing guru that Jase suddenly has inherited, which is awesome. But there's that replacement concept as well. Now, what does this remove from my life and what does it enable me to do? So the kind of knock-on effects of technology augmenting or adding to our kind of social capacity, right? What can we do? What can we do more of? What can we do better? And how do we skill up and how do we train within this space in order to be more creative or, you know, sell more stuff, right? Because we're inherently capitalistic when it comes down to this. So that's a couple different angles that we're looking at from the Dell perspective, and also from an academic or like an approachability standpoint from my own personal stake.
Okay, that kind of piece on, I suppose, like the controversies of ChatGPT and the limitations we'll definitely get to. I think it's an interesting and important area to talk about, but I would really love to kind of delve into some examples and hear how people are using it, both online and in person. So maybe looking at the kind of like generative creative side of things that we've talked about. So marketing, content, we're talking about blog posts, content creation, all of that side of stuff. I've also seen some interesting examples of using it basically as, you know, the senior team that you don't have yet. So whether that's using it as a sounding board for like an advisory team, and whether it's, you know, supporting you in doing research, preparing for meetings, all that kind of stuff, which is quite interesting. But we'd be interested to hear what examples people have seen about it, marketing wise, content creation wise, that, you know, can share. If anyone's willing to share.
I mean,
Sure.
so I run a startup. We do AI generated marketing content.
Great.
It's called coso.ai. But you know, we find it's super interesting. For a lot of different use cases. We actually spent the last couple of years building a lot of our own AI tech. And then gradually over the last like 12 months, swapped everything we had built to stuff that was openly available.
Wow, okay.
Because we were running on a relatively low budget, just a couple of us building the tech stack. And we built an initial product to like, well, it was like basically a front for us to get data for AI stuff. And now we just kind of replaced a lot of what we had built ourselves with like ChatGPT or other kind of publicly available tools.
And what you built kind of just became obsolete?
Yeah, like we were doing top classification for like large sets of social media data. And ChatGPT just does that way better than the model that we had trained ourselves.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like niche use case like that. It's kind of interesting. We could have actually started building the company about 2 months ago. We'd probably be in a similar spot.
Wow.
We wouldn't have learned what we learned, like, but yeah.
I think that's it. Like there's certain, obviously not necessarily inefficiencies, but you know, we don't have access to the amount of data that it has access to, and it is able to use its intelligence to make sense of that, which means we can do things so much quicker, and at such a pace. Like 2 months ago, that would have you've been in such a different position. Like,
Yeah.
crazy.
I have one. Well, for all the coders that are worried, so I gave it my mate's rule book for his football game called Counterattack, and asked it to start writing me the game in Unity, which is a gaming development platform. And it does it. It goes, yeah, here's how you would do this, here's how you would do that, here's how you would do this, here's how you would do that. It was wonderful, but I have no idea what to do next. And when I ask it what to do next, you've written me all this code. Where do I start putting this into Unity? It doesn't know, because that's a weird question. So I don't think anyone's coding jobs just yet out the window. But yeah, it was fantastic that it inherently understood things like the offside rule and was able to write code for how to do offside in a football game, which is just jaw dropping. Well, actually in nuance, right? In nuance, I argued with it for about an hour about second phase, right? And then it eventually went, oh, I get it now. So the player can, and it wrote code for second phase offside, which was just amazing. It was just like, wow, where did they get that from? But it got it from somewhere. It's amazing. So yeah, I don't think anyone's coding job, because the mentalities won't change, the structure of thinking won't change in people. I've always been a frustrated coder. I am not going to get any better as a frustrated coder just by having the code. It turns out.
Question. Yes, hi, hello everybody. I'm Stephen Lesteven. I haven't met a lot of you people here. recovering retired software engineer, I suppose, at heart, but I'm involved in a lot of startups, in particular just in mental wellness at the minute. But in the days whenever I was working in the lab in Nortel here, is when you're looking at very complex software, 90% of what you need to do in the software engineering community is to test it. You know, and I wrote some codes about asking it to do simple things, linking it together, and then I asked it to put together a testing strategy against it. And it tested what I'd asked it to do. And the question I have in a woman here is, do you see that evolving back up into a level where you'll be able to get multi-dimensional, multivariable testing scenarios against software to make it really robust? Because I think that's one of the biggest issues that I see. Now, it will happen, but where's the intercept point? And should we now be encouraging universities to do MSCs and testing strategies, and we're doing some of it now, because that's where the hard part's going to be.
We've done that next, right? We've used it to test our class code.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I'm terrible at names because I've got a grey beard. I think the names aren't that important for me, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the guy from Dell, Dave, I've got it written down here somewhere. Like, used the word. It seemed to be alluding to qualitative. People seem to talk about like you know what you talked about what we didn't need to do in there for what we could do next. And for me, a lot of this, both on to completely go, okay, that's going to produce content for me. I think that'll be a mistake. To completely go, that's going to create a large language model is going to create code for me. That'll be a mistake. Completely go, it'll create my head. What it does allow is on an individual level. For me, it seems to have enabled some scaling where you can go, okay, the quality of what I'm able to achieve has improved because you're simply not doing as much boilerplate, whether that's code boilerplate, marketing boilerplates, or whatever. And we're becoming more editors, I think, you know, and therefore the scales.
Interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I probably would reiterate that I'm the founder of a startup in Northern Ireland here, Broker IQ, and I use it largely for my marketing because obviously resources are tight, and we do outsource a good bit of our marketing, but it has made me so much more efficient. So if you go to Instagram, there's lots of Canva hacks. So the ability to use your ChatGPT to generate content and move it on to Canva, and then schedule your content so you have posts going out for 7 weeks. And I took that a step further even for my clients, running an email campaign, which again was generated with ChatGPT, and then offering them some free content just to get their interest. So using, and I did it, it took me a matter of minutes, and it was just a way of generating leads for myself. And then, I can't remember your name, but we use it with Ad Creative as well, which is maybe similar concept. I'm not sure, to generate ads for us and social media content for us as well, where they actually generate the content that we need. And again, it has saved hours of my day. And it's
this your link balance? Is it generating? No?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Not the copy to, but yeah, thanks. Not the personal ones now. And again, I agree with you. There has to be a mix between what that can do and then your personal content that's going out and what you can't.
Yeah.
No machine's going to.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I can get something that thinks for me, it'd be great. Completely.
I mean, I come from a music industry background, and music was completely just dilapidated by Napster, right? And everything just got shredded overnight. And our boss was convinced we'd put all the music on Napster because who else had the music and all this sort of stuff, just crazy stuff. I'm watching a model get just torn apart in days, and it feels like that again, but it's different because I remember walking down Carryduff Road, having lost their jobs, and the guy was with went, you know what, he's just offended that we know everything he used to know. And I never forgot that line. It was just, yeah, he's offended that we know everything he used to know now, but how to distribute music. And he said, like, libraries gave us power. They didn't like it when we had libraries either. And it reminded me of that moment. It is power, and it gives us power, and it gives us the biggest library in the world, which should give us all the power. It's great. Should be great.
There's a question online. I actually put the names, so they'll have they just raise their hand, but please feel free to shout out.
John, do you want to shout out your question?
Great. Yeah, me. Yeah. So yeah, I'm an academic at Queen's. I run a module in first year for computing students called Computer Science Challenges, which is kind of doing a final year project in first year. And as soon as ChatGPT arrived, I got my students to use it for their projects. And it's had an amazing impact on what those students can do in a way that no other technology I've ever experienced has had that impact. So students at a kind of 2-2 level are producing first-class projects. Students that really couldn't have done stuff, you know, they have a very limited amount of programming experience, are creating iOS apps with ad integration and payment integration, things that are really fiddly to do, that have lots of you know, backwards incompatibilities. The documentation is wrong, all this kind of stuff, and they can get it working in a situation that they never would have before. Students that really couldn't manage themselves have just asked ChatGPT, like, here's the high level goal that I have, give me a plan, and then they literally do what it tells it to do, tells them to do, and it's completely transformed their experience. And internally in Queen's, you know, obviously there's some tension between like, what is the impact of this going to be? Like, do we need to see this as a cheating tool? So you've got kind of the old guard viewing it like that, and then you got a whole bunch of people who are like, this is calculators, right? Like the whole world is different now. But you know, some of us are changing the teaching completely to be basically ChatGPT first, and working out how to teach students where you say, look, try to answer everything with this tool, and then see where are the limitations, how do you get it better? But yeah, completely amazing. So hopefully that was interesting.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, John. I think it kind of sparks questions of like what happens further down the line. Like, is there a point where we, and I see you working up there, like, is there a point where we become reliant on the technology? Like, yes, we have a generation of experienced software developers, but as more, you know, junior developers come through and are using ChatGPT, do we lose that knowledge that's held in humans? Does it almost then over time transfer to the machines? And like, is that a fear?
Just talking about Copilot, that's exactly what Copilot does. It learns from humans, all the
I'll
code and data.
come back to you, Jim. Sorry, Terry, you were going to
No, I just want to augment your question there. So like, I get like the power of it and what we can do with it, but I want to know from anybody, even the experts in the panel there, how are we regulating it? So as the tech startup founder here, you know, how am I making sure that whatever this is producing, whether it's content for marketing or coding or some testing, how am I standing over that for my end users, for my insurance company, etc.?
I love that question.
Like the like I'm old enough to remember the first websites, neither the politics degree. We used to use this new internet thing to get content, to write essays for politics, to be an African politics. And every African state would pop up all sorts of crazy shit all over the internet. And what we were told very, very early was that verification piece. Who produces it? Who is the source of it? And who can stand over it? Surely this will be the next natural iteration of ChatGPT and everything else, is that you then have to verify the source of the material that is produced, and then you have to then use your human intelligence and wisdom to verify the validity of whatever it is that you're using the technological tool to do. And that's what makes us humans and makes this a machine. Is that what will happen?
I think even at a low level with the marketing content that I've used it for, I'm always very aware with my own, because we're both in the insurance and mortgage space, I suppose. I'm aware with my own knowledge of the industry, not to go too far outside the boundaries of what I don't know, in case there's something there that we just don't trust it myself yet. So you'll see that anything I do is quite within a niche that as a human I can read and interpret and understand that it's okay to use this content, because I know that that's okay.
But people trust Wikipedia, right? And they didn't when Michael was writing his essay. You know?
I think there's a couple of interesting points coming up. I mean, as it's already been said, human interaction is still required. You still have to go through the content and make sure it makes sense, and some of it stacks up. what we're talking about is numbers and probability that are coming out of the system, nothing else. That's all it is. It's just numbers. The interesting date to keep in mind in terms of regulation is going to be the 30th of April, when OpenAI have to go back to the Italian government saying what they're going to do in order to make sure ChatGPT is any form of GDPR compliant, which is going to be an interesting one, considering it took anything between 12 and $100 million to develop GPT-4, depending on who you read. And these models aren't generated every day. This is just one large language model. To go back, take the data out, which is what the Italian government are basically wanting, and retrain it, is going to be an interesting concept to see how things go forward and how we deal with all of this. And the next interesting part is, if Italy aren't happy, what happens with 26 other European countries, and what are they going to say about it? Because what we're talking about is a very American thing right now, which affects the whole planet, but there are rules in place in terms of regulation, content, ownership in the EU that could cause a bit of a problem. So regulation, absolutely. What's going to happen? We'll have a better idea next week.
But just 2.6 is small enough to run on a computer, right? So 3.5 is going to get smaller. 2.6 is small enough to run locally on your local computer, right?
Yeah.
So 3.5 is eventually going to get small enough to run your local computer. So, you know, what are you going to tell me about my personal copy?
There's one released by like Stanford, like the Facebook model that runs on your computer. Yeah, it has paraphrased 3.5,
which is perfectly
I think what we'll see coming as well is splinters of very specific use case language models coming out. I think GPT is just the start, but I think businesses will start developing their own off the back of that as well over the next 6-12 months.
I mean, you have to, right? Because generalized knowledge is great. It's great up until a certain point. You know, through all the examples that folks have given here, you're talking about generalized knowledge situations, right? You're talking about marketing. Marketing is a generalized knowledge pool. It doesn't rely a lot on anything other than the common colloquial wisdom that we all have, right? We're selling to an audience, we're selling to people, we're selling things to other things, beings, persons, whatever. And I think that's important to understand, right? It is a generalized knowledge pool. Gentleman from, or John, sorry, in my upper left-hand corner, Queen's University, right? And I have the same problem at UCD. I do a lot of research. That's how I found Mike, funny enough. I'm doing a lot of research. I'm going through this thing, and I've used GPT, and Mike's given me other tools that I can use, and it's very expensive and gets very expensive very, very quickly. Thanks, Mike, for Poe. $200 freaking a year. It's expensive. That being said, you know, it's this concept of trust but verify, right? It's always understanding that the current state of LLMs, and I'm talking general LLMs, not, you know, hyper verticalized or hyper industrial or hyper specific models. They're all based around generalized knowledge and generalized opinions. They are not, there is no veracity to these models. They are a collection of us, and we are liars, cheats, we're everything, right? And it's not to say that there's badness or goodness. It's a completely amoral standpoint. It's a machine reporting on the state of humanity at any given point. So what you have is the perfect storm of trust but verify. So it's the Jase's comment about the Italian government. How did you roll all this stuff together? Well, I don't know. We just kind of, hey, where's humanity at in 2021, right? What did we grab? What did we do? What have we done? So you have to understand that from the baseline. So how you develop, and even the problems with Copilot, reporting against private code repositories, right? You run into these interesting collisions where we're not quite set up as a society, as a community, as countries, as nation states, or whatever, to understand the limitlessness of data. It is everywhere. It perfuses everything that we do. So sounds super philosophical. It's really not. We're all connected. We're connected more now than we ever have been in the entire history of humanity. We understand it. So all this thing rolled into one. You talked about someone asked a really great question about regulation, which I know we're kind of touching around. The problem with governments and the problem with regulation is they are reactive to, they are not proactive, for. So what you have is this knee-jerk reaction to signing a 6-month moratorium on AI development, which is complete and utter bullshit, because it doesn't accomplish what it sets out to do. Because China's not sitting there going, "Yeah, we're going to stop." America's not going to sit there and stop, you know, and I don't even take umbrage at the fact that we have tons of fingers pointing at the United States and how we're managed to fuck up the world every single week. It is a thing that we do. But what we have to understand is, in order for us to do the right thing with these things, and I won't wax on too much more here, we have to understand that everything we're dealing with is generalized, that governments are always going to be reactive too. And so we need our advocates saying, hey, listen, I think we can do this better. Here's how we do curative models. Like, how do we interact with this data? How do we clean it? How do we preserve from a privacy standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint? Here's how we will build and make this stronger and do things better. So anyway, my 2 cents.
So would I be right, Dave, in saying that the information that it gathers, so its data set as such, is for the free version that any of us can go on and use now, is up to September 2021, is that right? They read that, yeah. Okay, so
Yeah.
So there's 3, as far as my understanding goes, there's 3 kind of options. So there's like the normal free version, which I believe is GTP 3.5. And then there's the plus version, which is 4. And both of those, the data that you input in that is used to retrain the model. So there's no, I suppose, you wouldn't be wanting to put sensitive data in there, so there is no data protection. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the APIs, you can input sensitive data and there would be no concern over data protection.
Yeah, that's
Is that
correct.
Okay, so that's, I suppose, Claire, like, just again, coming back to your question on, you know, regulations, but also how is the data handled? Like, if you are using it on your browser, it is going to be, you know, taking in that data that you're inputting into it so that it can continuously improve the model. So always opportunities to use like the APIs.
Well, search engines has been doing that for 30 years. You know, it's none of this is new. But the difference is it just knows the next word. Google never knew the next word.
Search with it.
Yeah, just knows the next word, which is why it's an expert coder, which is why I can write poems like Bob Dylan. You know, it just knows the next word, which isn't that terrifying if you think about it. Everyone's going, oh, it just knows the next word.
Any other examples in the room or even online with Connor? I think you were talking about maybe trying to share some examples if you have them.
Should have Connor online, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we're just like everybody else in the room. Like Jase, mostly we're using it for generative content, for writing, marketing, writing code through Copilot and whatever. But we also are trying to integrate it into software, which is surprisingly easy to do. It's really easy to integrate GPT into any piece of software as long as you engineer the prompts correctly. But it's very easy as well to go too far too quickly with it. The thing that stops us from doing it is that inherently, as was mentioned, there's a bias in GPT. There's also a cost involved to use the API. And it's also not predictable as well. So if anybody asks you how you came up with an answer and you have to stand by that answer, then you're not going to be able to do that with GPT. So we use it to augment what we do, but we use it with caution.
I think that's like the overwhelming message that comes out of any of these conversations that we have, is that there needs to be human oversight over it, and there needs to be that input and, I suppose, control over the end output and the product that it comes to.
I have a question. I'm guessing Mike doesn't have humans between all of the stuff and all of the data that he's talking about, or some of the stuff. So we've been quite often talking about effectively human moderated stuff where you're going, okay, I'm using a large language model, but I'm asking it a question, and then whenever it looks ridiculous, then I say no. That is interesting, but that's not all that people are using it for, because it obviously some of the stuff where we were talking about data analysis and stuff like that. I'm guessing to some extent some of these tools are coming up with answers. So people are in many ways allowing whether it's just a simple help thing or something like that, where you're cutting down your help docs, and rather than somebody having to go and look for the answer, you're cutting it into chunks and letting the language model understand wee bits of it and then regurgitate it out to people, whether it's that stuff. But I'm really fascinated by the fact that we've heard data analysis used twice. I think Dave and Mike both talked about data analysis, and I'm only looking for a simple one-word answer. Are you actually using language models for data analysis? Because I kind of thought that wasn't a thing, and I'm probably wrong.
Mike or Dave on the call? Yeah, Mike, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I wanted to, I'll answer, I'd love to respond to that, but I also wanted to respond to something else that was mentioned, which is these are next word predictors, which is 100% correct. The only thing that I would add is the deepness to being able to predict the next word. Language models are powerful because language is powerful. Within our language, we encode things like world models, right? We understand that balls, bounce on the floor, cars move fast. These are world models that is encoded in the language. So when you predict the next word, you're actually encapsulating all of that information and all of those concepts. Similarly, being able to handle large amounts of context to answer the next word, whether you're taking a sentence, a paragraph, a page, a textbook, predicting the next word is in context of so much more. So language models, yes, the actual output and the power of them is quite simple, but within them is also embedded tremendous amounts of information, some notion of understanding, some notion of reasoning. And that is going to be my self-segue into something else that was brought up, which is like, how can we use these things to manage quality assurance for things like insurance businesses, which I think one of the attendees had mentioned, and how one might use these throughout your business in general for data related issues. The first piece is to rely on reasoning and not generative. So for example, there are chatbots out. I'll speak to a domain that we're working in, which is the financial domain. So today there's like StockGPT, FinChat.io, Rose.ai, like the list goes on in terms of people building amazing tools in this space. And what they're asking for is like, well, language model, please tell me the historical revenue for this type of company, tell me margins for this business. What you're asking the model to do in this case is actually generative. It's taking your prompt, looking through some sort of corpus of information, and then trying to generate an answer. Those are next word prediction tasks fundamentally. And it's hard to sort of set up the guardrails for this model to simply take information and deliver it back to you. So if you were to just use a language model in that way, I think you'd run into some problems. But some initial solutions include, first of all, relying on reasoning tasks as opposed to generative tasks, focusing on the things that these models do well. So again, that's like summarization, fact extraction, changing style or translation in certain ways, for example, from text to SQL. These types of things can be more sort of tightly handled. And then there's various tactics for getting at veracity. So for example, adding redundancies to these things, generating multiple answers if you want that approach, and then sampling and finding some sort of composite or most frequently answered response. Or simply pinging a different database, so handling retrieval. So for example, if you have, let's say, a question and you have some sort of graph or simply put like an Excel sheet, how can you take the language model, let it understand that it can ping your Excel sheet for an answer and then bring it back to you? This is one of the larger questions, one of the larger problems that the space currently faces. But for everything I just mentioned, rest assured, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of PhD level, really smart people around the world working on this problem, funded by billions of dollars of investment to solve these exact problems, to take these very simple models that predict the next word, but encode tremendous knowledge and have that reasoning engine do more. As a side note, there is a philosophical debate as to how far these models can go, big picture, in getting us generalized use cases versus the need to add additional capabilities. But that is just a note in terms of like, these things are very powerful and we just need to handle them with care as we deploy them in production.
Answer your question.
Personally, I wouldn't.
What he said.
If I was doing data analysis that was sales data and that kind of thing, I'd use Excel. I wouldn't be using ChatGPT.
That's why I asked the question, but Mike's answer makes a lot of sense.
Why?
Mike's answer does make an awful lot of sense. I'd like some of those billions of dollars too.
What if you don't know how to use it?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I love the thing Mike said about these models are powerful because we inherently encode a model of the world in our language. I'm gonna rob that. But I think what we found is that like the LLM stuff, like ChatGPT and the like, is good for approximations, but if you can wrap it in traditional programming logic, it gets very good at exact things. So for the topic classification that we're doing with social media posts, it's very hard to get a predictable output. So like if it's Manchester United, one of the accounts we're looking at, it could be MUFC or it could be Man United or it could be Manchester United. But if you use some traditional, not kind of NLP, but kind of logical based word matching algorithms, so like fuzzy search is like a concept where it does like a Euclidean distance of words, which is just a traditional algorithm that's been around for decades. If you apply that at the end, then suddenly you've got a very exact topic classifier within reason. And if you encase it in logic at either side, then what the AI do is thing, you like reduce the search space, you can get very much, way better exact outputs, way more predictable outputs than just the AI having like a near infinite search space for potential answers.
Any other questions in the room or online?
How do we all feel about data and information hierarchies in the future? This forced an issue, sort of full circle. When you're old, you get a chance to see lots and lots of circles. So looking back at the times I was working with the early AI models on healthcare analysis, when everybody wanted to be involved in the program, everybody wanted everybody else's data, but nobody would give their own. And you're at the stage now, and that's just true. Even working with the health service here, the primary healthcare providers, the GPTs, wouldn't give or the GPs wouldn't give their information to the hospitals, and same with the ambulance service. And all this information is different, but they all wanted access to everybody else's, and that was the same with the drugs companies, and that was the same of the researchers. So this sort of my thinking of that, this next generation of multi-language models and the analysis and the AI that's going to sit on top of them, will there be, and it's been partially answered by moving it into, splitting and focusing, will there be a situation where ChatGPT and its derivatives and clones and friends will be a central source, and then it'll be circulated, and the industry for us will be the circles and the crusts that sit around that, is to put individual chunks of data and specialist applications, largely driven by unique data on top of that. That sort of jumps out to me as being a very sensible next intercept point as an entrepreneur. How does everybody feel about that? Am I up the wrong tree?
I see Dave has his hand up, maybe he wants to share.
Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, I think there's a couple of different answers to your statement. I think the first thing is, yeah, it absolutely is the next wave of this. We've already seen this concept of data brokers, right? Cambridge Analytica, it's a data broker, and it's nothing more than that. It was relaying information that was collected, right? So, and all the nuances and perverseness that brought with it, right? So you have this kind of weird space. You have this concept now that's emerging of prompt engineers that are being hired. Like the thing that they're really good at doing is asking really good questions, right? It's the ultimate application of a Socratic method of living and doing life, right? I ask great questions. I get paid a lot of money to ask great questions. I mean, I want that job. I can talk all I want to. And then the net result of this is getting people to ask good questions that return great results ultimately equates to value, right? And as a society, we place value on the things that give us, velocity of market. Speaking as a business, we want to do things that are going to move the needle for us. They're going to change our ARR or MRR, that are going to encourage other people to subscribe to our model, do what we want, and do those type of things. At the same time, somebody had mentioned before, or I forget who, we grow accustomed to these type of tools being prevalent and present in the market. There becomes a democratization and ubiquitousness to these things. And so you end up with social divides based around access to technology. What happened during COVID? What we suddenly realized is that not everybody has the same access to technology, same access to information, same access to the infrastructure that's needed in order to compete in market or to learn or to educate. And as a responsible society, part of what we have to understand is we can push this, it's almost Sisyphean, if you will. We're pushing this rock up the hill, but we're going to get bowled over and have to do it all over again because we're outstripping basically the capability of society to support all these things. So we're going to end up with, again, this digital divide that says, if you have the money, the billions that Jase was alluding to, and Mike was alluding to as well, if you have these billions, then you're going to succeed in market. If you don't have those billions, you're not. And if you don't have access to that data, then you're going to find yourself in something like digital poverty, right? Which may not equate to social poverty, but will disable you. And I use that somewhat ubiquitously. It will disable you from making any kind of movement within society, within employment, within all these things that we're setting up. Again, going back to my point about reactive governments, this is where we have problems with policy around what we develop and what we build. We can so far outstrip the capability of our infrastructure, our social systems based on technology, that we actually cause harm for all the technological process and progress that we do. So roundabout question or roundabout answer, I would say, yeah, we're going to have this digital divide of that data haves and the data have nots, the technology haves and that technology have nots. And we're seeing that emerge. It's the Muskian principle of, I'm going to throw myself and billions of dollars at a problem, or I'll create more problems than I really solve. And we're going to end up in that space. So yeah, it's coming, it'll be here, and it's going to hurt. And then we're going to react. And we're going to do it all over again with the next wave of technology that happens. We are very, very predictable in that kind of standpoint. So again, my comment on that, but
it kind of goes back to a couple of things. I mean, with the data that we do have, see, this is what OpenAI had that we didn't have, was they had all the data. They went and scraped it for God knows how long. Google had been collating data since they started. So we always knew they'd do a language model at some point. It was just a case of when. They just waited 20 years. What has been interesting to me over the last couple of years is the number of startups that wanted to start doing AI models of some form, but not have the data to do so. And that's why I started building Synthetica. The idea was to drive the creation of data to be able to generate AI models for startups. To be able to augment it with data that's out there as well to create a better model is going to be important as we go on. I think what we'll see happen is the enthusiasm for ChatGPT might dwindle a little bit once the hype cycles died down and we've got used to what it can actually do, the accuracy it can do it in, and also where it does sit in society, because it's either going to be one of three things. You're either going to be a human doing something a human can do, or the AI is going to replace that human task, or it's going to be AI and human, which is the preferred. I still want people to work. There's a huge problem with job removal going on. But the data's all over the place. What's going to be interesting is I think people will start taking care of the data a lot more now knowing what can possibly happen. but I also think there'll be a huge rise in synthetic data as well for some of that training. So you can all phone me when you're ready.
I saw, so Mike has his hand up, but also Naomi might have had a question, or something, but if you want to unmute yourself and share.
Hi, so Naomi McGregor, founder and CEO, CTO of MoveThrough. So mine was around actually slightly what Jase was just talking about the missing data sets and the gaps, because we know ChatGPT has been made with a huge bias because the data that we have in industry right now doesn't include females in the first round of medical device and its design. Whenever we're actually going to launch them in industry, women and people from underrepresented backgrounds aren't included within the tests. So how are we actually going to make sure that diversity at every level is actually included within all these large data sets? And how can ChatGPT and looking at creating and missing data, how can we do that to actually make sure that we create an equal opportunity for society?
I think Mike and I want to answer that at the first because I saw Mike getting really excited. Mike, do you want to do that one?
No, please, that's all you.
No, one thing. Okay, thanks. Yes, that model is heavily biased. I've been looking at some use cases. I've been talking to my daughter about it as well, and she's not very happy. The other thing to keep in mind with generating that kind of data out of ChatGPT is one thing GPT is very slow. It's not a fast technology. So some of the trials I've been doing, trying to generate synthetic data where it's taking 30, 40 seconds to get a couple of hundred rows out of ChatGPT. It's not that great. Whereas I'm generating 3.5, 4 million in the same amount of time. So GPT is not going to be good for that kind of thing. Whether it can start telling us where the gaps are, the balances, the biases, and all the rest of it, I don't know. And also, like we've already discussed, the model itself was trained on data up to a certain point. It hasn't been retrained since. So those biases are always going to be in there unless people are feeding back through the UI more data to go back in. So yeah, all valid points, Naomi, completely.
It just showed up this morning, actually, in a conversation between a couple of different attorneys, right? ChatGPT assumed that a paralegal was a woman and not an actual attorney. I mean, it's intrinsic. Listen, everything that Western society has done is set up men to be the victors and women to be subjugated to that concept. We see it reflected in the data. Again, Jase, to your point, this is a summation of human history or modern human history based on this idea of patristic rule. It sucks. It's the baseline. And that's where we have to start influencing and changing these things, because we need to be able to feed back in the system that says there are successful women, there are successful women founders, there are successful women CTOs, so on and so forth. But it's not going to be exposed in that data unless we are active, and I would say activism, activists within this space saying we will use these, but we will also influence these models based on where we work, what vertical we're in, so on and so forth. We have to be able to provide that baseline for data to change these systems, because it's just a rote machine. It's going to suck that in and it's going to spit it out. So the more we can kind of perfuse what modern society should look like, right, our ideal state, the better chance we have in influencing some of these things. And again, that's for open models. And I would argue that OpenAI is about as open as the closed front door in my apartment right now. It's not going to be open for anybody, right? And these are closed systems. So we have to absolutely influence these things by good data, absolute, reinforcement of these ideals that we want to actually mirror. It's like training a child. We want to reinforce good behaviors to our children and how we reflect these things. And we do that by examples. We do that by feeding into these systems and creating the environment whereby they learn, whereby they grow, they flourish, so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Imagine if it's knowledge stuff in 1951, someone said.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to share your thoughts to your hand up, and then we'll wrap up with the final question?
Yeah, Naomi, that's such an important, challenging question. And I don't have any good answers except to say, first, I think it's really hard to train models to not be biased. You can set up sort of rules. So constitutional AI approaches, I think out of Anthropic is working on this type of thing where you basically tell the model, here's the set of rules that you always go to whenever you start generating responses. But in general, most of these biases, I would be careful to call that. So the output is biased. However, to the model, it's simply parametric knowledge or the weights in the model that generate this next token prediction. So there was a really interesting example from the Allen Institute, which is like an ML AI think tank, if you will. They asked the classic example of like, what was it? Dad and son got into a car crash. Son was brought to the hospital. Doctor says, I can't operate on this child. He is my son. And then it's like, how is this possible? So you might think that the answer directly is, oh, it's the mother, it's the doctor. Yes, that is like how the story goes. But ChatGPT can give you answers like, oh, it's actually the step parent. It can give you answers like, oh, it is a transgender man who had birth to the child prior to the transition. Like these are the types of depths of this type of model. It doesn't really have a sense of what the hell it's talking about or even what it should be talking about, but it's able to generate answers. So so it's very hard to sort of train the model, even if you feed back and say, no, this is the answer. The model is not actually learning per se. You're not necessarily changing the weights. So on a go-forward basis, it's hard to sort of take that approach. There's another approach, which I think is very important, which is dealing with the data itself. So Stanford HAI, so the human-centered AI team, they had a conference, I think, a few months ago. One of the attendees, I think, was like Marshall Scholar, Rhodes Scholar, something very impressive and super smart. And he is building sort of this concept of, can we get raters to look at this model or rate the data and like large swaths of data? But then, of course, the subsequent question is, who are the raters? And then who decides the raters? So once you get into this social data creation process, you enter a new sort of domain of issues, which we also don't have good answers for. But this is also where Jase's work is really important, which is synthetic data. So to what degree can we sort of like create sufficient data to overwhelm the existing embeddings and the existing knowledge that these things have? Perhaps that is an interesting approach too. Something else that I think it was Stephen was talking about is like, and this is slightly rewinding to a different issue of what happens with these big models and is it one model to rule them all? And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this issue. Is we're trying to think about market structure like 3 years from now and to say like, okay, well, depending on whether you think GPT is going to be one model rule them all, that dramatically changes how you go and build your business around these types of technologies and companies. Our general sort of framework back of the envelope is, well, capitalism informs us that these models will keep expanding to the extent that profit continues to exceed loss, where it's net profitable for these businesses, or even loss making if you have VC funding or Microsoft to back your endeavors, or Google. So what this means is like, okay, well, if there is GPT and it can handle like 80% of use cases, then of course, OpenAI can go ahead and build GPT healthcare, GPT finance, GPT insurance, same with Google. And as long as those things are incrementally net, marginally profitable, they will go ahead and build those things. And I wonder if y'all have thoughts on that. But going back, Naomi, thank you for that question. Incredibly important. Those were some thoughts and a question for the crew.
I know we do have one more question in the room, and to be fair, I would actually love to kind of continue this conversation even more generally on ChatGPT. So as a side note, what I will do is add everyone to our Slack community, and I'll just create a wee thread where you can continue the discussion. But I know James is itching to ask this final question.
Oh yeah, so I just while we have the brain power now, does anyone have any thoughts on like cars, computer, electricity, phones? All like big culture shifts, big profession shifts, loads of people out of work. People either learned to drive or got into show jumping in 1910, I suppose. But like, does anyone have any thoughts of like AI and LLMs and stuff fundamentally a different shift, or will we just be grand again after a decade of people finding new jobs?
I have one for you. So someone got it, David Guetta got it to create an Eminem rap that you couldn't possibly tell in a million years wasn't Eminem.
Yeah.
And no one owns it. He doesn't own it. Chat doesn't own it. Eminem doesn't own it. He's using it in front of 35,000 people, and Eminem will never be paid for it. They've also got it to write a George Harrison song. George Harrison's obviously dead, and you'd swear George Harrison wrote this song.
Yeah.
So there's amazing stuff that's going to come out. And again, for me, thinking about walking down the Carryduff Road with your career in tatters in the music industry, who would have known you'd be sitting there 25 years later, listening to a new George Harrison song, and George Harrison's dead.
Yeah.
So there's all manner of stuff that comes from that, and generating movies and making new Ren and Stimpy episodes and all sorts of creative endeavors that people own.
Yeah.
That they're not going to own anymore, because you're going to be able to get chat and some other thing
Yeah.
to create a new Ren and Stimpy episode.
But beyond like creativity stuff, like, you know, like people are gonna, like, does anyone have any thoughts around the industrial revolution basically that we're going through at the moment? Is it fundamentally different from anything else in the last 100 years or so? Or?
I think it is different in the fact that we're already at overload.
Okay.
Exactly. So what this will probably do is, I mean, most of us are at an information high, but we'll probably get more useful information in that overload over the next period of time and what happens, and that'll probably take 3 to 4 years. But then what happens in 10 or 20?
It's faster too, isn't it? It's so fast,
Yeah.
you can't keep up.
What did they say whenever the industrial revolution was happening? Presumably everybody was shitting themselves. I'm not very good at history, but presumably half the people thought it was going to be great and half the people thought it was absolutely terrible and we're never going to recover. And you only know afterwards. Like, I'd be interested to know if any of the people that are closer to it have any opinions on your question like that.
Yeah.
I feel like generally we're very adaptable, like, and we're very resilient. I think even like the younger generations that have grown up with the technologies that say maybe we didn't, or those older than us didn't, like, are very quick to adapt to new things coming in. But my concern is just kind of that potential knowledge gap, like where it gets to the point where knowledge is lost, but the machines still have it, but the new generations coming through don't. That's kind of my concern.
Maybe in a wider sense, but I think that like some of the, like, obviously this whole like technology and our accessibility to it does actually mean that society is probably more educated now than it ever has been. And yes, in some ways we're stupider and we have a lower attention, and there's other things that might be happening too. But at the same time, if I want to know how to create like a ornamental flower arrangement, all I have to do is put it on YouTube, pick up the stuff, and I can make that. And that's not something my mum could have done 40 years ago. It's definitely not something my granny could have done 80 years ago. So I think there's probably a shift in perspective about what we will know. So yes, the machines will know some things, but we would have access to like an entire encyclopedia of whatever it is that we want to learn, should we choose to learn it. And it maybe is that kind of like battle between whether we actually use it or whether we sit and play, a game or something instead. Like, I don't know, it's maybe a bit different.
Imagine if we didn't try to profit from it.
Hmm?
Imagine, because the first thing we do is go, how can we sell it? Imagine if we didn't try to profit for it, because when libraries came, there's the famous line is libraries gave us power and then word came and made us free, and it could make us so free. If people decided not to profit from it, it could make it so free, but they won't. They try to profit from it, and then we'll have a war over it, and then maybe we'll decide to end the money. Maybe it's the end of money.
Thoughts, Stefan, for yourself?
Hi there. Yeah, and thanks very much. First of all, just thanks to everyone for this. This was absolutely brain-meltingly interesting. So thanks very much. But the interesting thing with this was we've used this tech in our business. We replaced a 10-person strong outsourced kind of lower value research team with ChatGPT and an analyst who knew what to ask it. And now we didn't save a lot of money because we had to pay for it and data and all the rest of it, but we have added value to the process. So the main thing with this whole topic has been putting value at the right part of your business process, and the creativity and the imagination that comes from the people working on it still adds the value. That's what people pay us for, so I think the interesting conversation earlier about the potential to almost cheat the system a little bit with this and to kind of cheat code things just doesn't fly, because people who are outstanding at what they do will still be outstanding at what they do, and they'll use this technology as a platform to go on and do something even more fantastic with it. And those that want to cheat the system and use it to cover the basics will find their level. It's just a really interesting piece. But on the Industrial Revolution point, I think that was a really interesting idea. I think this is just a movement of where value is and the repositioning of actually what we're needed for. And probably that better questioning, better analysis, and better presentation is probably where we're going to add value. And the lower value stuff that exists on the internet already, I think we're not going to get value from providing that anymore. That's it. But mainly, thank you, everyone. This was fantastic.
Thank you, Duncan. Thanks very much to Mike and Dave online, Connor, James, Joanne, everyone for sharing their examples. I think that was a really valuable conversation. And as I said, we will share our Slack community if you're not part of it already, but it gives you an opportunity to continue the conversation there. But I hope you find that as interesting as Declan kindly put, brain meltingly interesting. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Thus, we have our next event on the 11th of May that you're all welcome to. So if you're a startup founder, or in particular a SaaS startup founder, it'll be of interest to you. It's a game of startup poker, which we teach unit economics through. Did it last year, absolutely brilliant. We've refined it a wee bit for this year, and it should be good crack. Nothing else, I'm sure you'll take a lot from it. But I'll send details of that to everybody who joined. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Stephanie.